Right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for your patience while we did a little bit of troubleshooting with our Zoom sharing screen. I'm Lori Zimmerman, Director of Professional Learning with MASA, and we are really excited to welcome Olivia Christensen and Kate Dole to our session today, talking about some of the things that they've learned around consistent attendance in kindergarten. And one of the things that I was most interested in were just some takeaways in the conversation that they have been having that may help us in our roles within districts. So, Olivia and Kate, I turn it over to you.
Thank
All right.
you.
I'll just say hi, everyone. My name is Liv, and I'm in the early education division at the Department of Ed, and my role is to support kindergarten and early elementary related initiatives. So attendance has been a hot topic in that realm, and I'm happy to share this work with all of you.
And my name is Kate Dole. I also work with Liv in the early education division at MDE. I support early childhood special education, and I also support general education initiatives in early elementary, and attendance is one of the projects that I've been working on with Liv. Great to be here.
And since it's a small group, I mean, we'll go through these slides, but if you have any burning questions along the way, feel free to just chime in, and we have time for Q&A and thoughts afterwards, but we can chat. All right, let's see. This is there, did it. Switch slides, good.
Yeah, looks good. Many of you are probably familiar with the 10 commitments to equity. I think the one that I really want to point out for this particular presentation is number 6, start early. I think that you'll really hear throughout this presentation that we think that starting early when it comes to supporting consistent attendance is incredibly important, and we hope today you'll have some takeaways about why that is and some strategies for addressing inconsistent attendance in kindergarten. So I don't know if any of you have seen this before, probably some of you have. In our work at MDE, we've really moved away from using terms like school readiness and kindergarten readiness, since those terms have really maybe inadvertently led us to a place where responsibility for being quote unquote ready for school was being placed on young children. And instead, we're now using this, which we call the successful learner equation. And we're using it as our framework for both the language and the work of early education. Oops, I think we have a little bit of, oh, perfect, there we go, a little feedback. The successful learner equation really reminds us that it's not the responsibility of a child to be ready for school, it's the responsibility of adults. So it's families, schools and programs, communities and systems that should instead be ready to support each child. And I really like to emphasize that we believe that no one of the entities on the left side of this equation can do this work alone. I actually think it should be a multiplication equation rather than addition. All of these entities have an incredibly important role to play in the development of the child, and in this case, in supporting consistent attendance. And since Liv and I work for the early education division at MDE, we also think it's helpful to give you some context about how we view the early education system. So here we have a graphic to illustrate that. And as an educational system, I do think we've had a tendency to silo off the experiences that happen prior to kindergarten from the early education experience. But I'm really inviting you as an audience to expand that view a bit, because what we've really come to learn from extensive research around brain development is that early education is what's happening from birth all the way up to age 8. During this time period in which kindergarten is solidly placed, children's brains are developing at a pace that's going to be unequaled at any other time in their life. So we really need to leverage every moment of this time period to ensure a solid foundation of learning. And that includes ensuring that our youngest learners are attending school consistently. And we also like to point out a list of beliefs and values that really guide our work and underpin the successful learner equation. And I'm not going to read all of these to you, but a couple that I want to highlight. The first bullet point, school should be inclusive, welcoming, and joyful for all. Another one, a strengths-based mindset is critical to supporting children and families. And then the second to last bullet, instruction should be developmentally appropriate, supported by research and individualized. I think these values and beliefs really play a big role in the work to improve consistent attendance. So I just wanted to highlight those. All right, so now that we kind of have set the stage, kind of where our mindset is, let's dive into chronic absenteeism. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, it's probably why you're here today, chronic absenteeism spiked after the COVID pandemic. And what we mean by chronic absenteeism, just as a reminder over on the right side, it means missing at least 10% of school days during the school year, which roughly means missing about 2 days per month. So it actually does add up quite quickly. And what you see on the screen is data specific to kindergarten attendance overall in Minnesota. But I do want to point out that when we break these numbers down by different demographics, there are some groups that are demonstrating much, much higher chronic absenteeism. And we also want to make it very clear why we are focusing on kindergarten attendance specifically. We know from the research that chronic absence in preschool and kindergarten is associated with lower levels of proficiency in social emotional development, in math, and in reading later in elementary school. And we also know that kindergarten absenteeism has been linked to challenges with executive functioning skills like working memory and cognitive flexibility, excuse me. Which we know are foundational to all academic learning and honestly success in life as an adult too. And finally, we know that kindergarten really sets the trajectory for attendance in later grades. So like I mentioned at the beginning, starting early and addressing these attendance issues is critical. And just so you know, at the end of this slide deck, we have linked some references to articles on the topic that you see on this slide, just for your reference in case you're interested later. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liv.
Thanks, Kate. Oh. Okay. I was trying to figure out the order. Now I remember what this slide is about. So as you can see, we saw like this huge jump in chronic absenteeism in kindergarten. It was also part of a national professional learning community the Department of Ed was part of called Kindergarten as a Sturdy Bridge with our former education secretary. And really just this focus on, the absenteeism in kindergarten specifically across the country. And for many of those reasons Kate just shared, recognizing how important it is. So we were able to dig in, do some engagement across the state on this. And this first slide is talking about some data we got from our kindergarten teacher survey. So for the past 4 years, we've been able to survey a rough list of kindergarten teachers. We get around 500 responses. So that's a pretty good turnout. Obviously, not every single kindergarten teacher in the state of Minnesota responds, but it's a solid amount. And last year we did ask them if chronic absenteeism affected their instruction. And we had over half saying that yes, it impacted their instruction. And just throwing a quote here, and I'm sure those of you in schools, or maybe this doesn't really come as a big surprise, but just the recognition that, when children are missing a lot, especially in that foundational first, for many, their first year of school, it's really, difficult to plan, to make sure that every student is getting the instruction they need, is engaged in an appropriate way, especially when certain children are missing a lot and the teacher needing to adjust instruction because there's a lot of whole group time. So we really will be asking this question again this year. So it'll be interesting to see if anything changes and if there's any relief in this area. But it was just a reminder that yes, this is a real issue that is impacting classrooms. We see the data and we also hear some qualitative evidence from teachers. So we were able to, with support from the Preschool Development Grant, do some engagement with districts and some with families to better understand the experience of kindergarten chronic absenteeism in schools and the challenges and the feelings that families have about helping their child, because in kindergarten, of course, it's very family dependent on getting to school. And so what is that experience as the family? These two were the two different projects. We worked with two different contractors. The first one, again, was to learn from districts that found effective ways to support consistent attendance in kindergarten. And we really tried to keep like circling back to that focus. Obviously, strategies to support attendance may be for the whole elementary school or the whole district, but we still wanted to bring a focus in with kindergarten. So I'll talk more, but in surveys and interviews, that was kind of brought back to the participants' attention. And then we worked with a contractor. Our contract did get somewhat delayed, so it ended up being more like a pilot study to engage with communities who experience higher rates of chronic absenteeism, to hear from families, to help us better understand, how we could provide better kindergarten enrollment and attendance resources, recognizing that we cannot necessarily put out every fire. Chronic absenteeism is dependent on a lot of different variables, but what could we do in our division to support families and schools in that communication? So this ended up being a smaller, shorter study, but was still really, really valuable information. So I'm going to provide a bit of an overview. In this presentation, I've merged our findings from the district engagement with the family engagement, just so it doesn't, I want to present this in a slightly more holistic way instead of just giving you, we found this, then we found this, where are the connections and disconnections. So I do my best to try to clarify who we're hearing from in each piece of data. The district engagement, you can see we had 97 participants, which was pretty amazing because this was done over last summer. And we're able to hear from pretty much, a lot of around the state, pretty good representation from across Minnesota. 77 people responded to surveys, and then there were 20 interviews. About half were teachers, administrators, and counselors responded, and then 30% were a mix of other educators, educational staff, ranging from paras, social workers, nurses, liaisons, and so on. In terms of the family engagement, and when I say we, I mean really our contractor, engaged with 15 different caregivers who had recently experienced inconsistent attendance with their kindergarten age students, or in the past kindergarten age students, mostly from our urban metro area. 87% identified as Black or African American. I believe there was one then that was American Indian, and one family that identified as white. Some of their kind of family experiences, background, we had a fair amount of single parents. Many recognized they had some challenges with transportation. 33% had a college education, and then unstable housing also were just part of their lived experience. And also the pie chart there on the right talks about how they describe their financial circumstances. As you can see, over half had some level of struggle with getting needs met, which requires a level of financial security. So these were some of the kind of complex drivers of kindergarten chronic absenteeism found through both of these studies. Again, some were more representative of the district study and the family study. I'm going to talk about the three a little more in depth that are starred. So health issues, not surprising, being a big driver of absenteeism in kindergarten. We know, of course, little young children who are maybe not been exposed to a big group like that, there is like sickness that can happen. And so that's a big issue, COVID-19, and has affected lots of our kind of concerns and questions over when to send your child to school and so on. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Ambivalence about kindergarten. This is something that is nationally recognized as kind of this thought of kindergarten's just like daycare. It doesn't really matter. Are they really doing anything anyway? So that came up in conversations, and developmentally appropriate practices. So I start health issues, and we maybe have a shared understanding of the actual sickness and things like that can go around a kindergarten classroom. But something that really bubbled up and caught our attention in both studies was health issues, thinking more specifically about mental health issues. And ranging from, you can see these different quotes. The kind of reddish ones are from teachers, and the blue is from a caregiver or a parent. So of course, there's a lot of parents dealing with anxiety or depression, which might be affecting their ability to help their child get ready for the day and get to school. And we know kindergarten is, really almost 100% reliant on an adult, a caregiver of some sort, helping that child get to school. And so when we are seeing these increases in just mental health needs of people in general in the country, in the world, in the state, we know that's affecting a lot of families and can affect their ability to support their children in getting to school. And then we're also, okay, the blue quote I want to talk about is from a caregiver who was really just seeing, if my child's breaking down and if they are so stressed out, I just don't maybe have the capacity or the trust to force them to school. And I'm worried about the increase in stress that's going to cause for the child. Obviously, as a parent myself, I know that can be stressful when you have a screaming child, dropping them off at school. And just this kind of tension of, maybe the emotional needs of that child, the lack of trust that the school is going to give them what they need, or the capacity is there at school, the capacity of the parent. So a lot of just conflicting issues around mental health and emotional health of children and how that affects the parenting experience as well, the caregiving experience. And then another quote from a teacher just saying we're asking too much of our kids, and I seeing them get stressed in classrooms and seeing that affect, that number one thing Kate shared, that school should be welcoming and joyful, and teachers feeling like it's hard for them to be joyful. These children are really stressed out and we're expecting too much, either with our curriculum or our assessments, the demands on children, maybe the demands they have at home and at school coupled together. They're struggling to keep up. They don't want to let us down. It's making getting to school hard. It's aware on their emotional and mental health. So this really stuck out to us as like, we know, we collaborate a lot with our Department of Health, our colleagues there, to make sure we can think about how to clarify all the kind of ever-changing rules about, fevers and colds, but also need to recognize there's some issues even as young as kindergarten. This isn't just a teenage issue about mental health and emotional needs. So ambivalence about kindergarten. So hear from teachers, and we hear this, and we, like I said, it's been part of our national conversations, is just not seeing kindergarten as critical, feeling like it's optional, particularly knowing that in Minnesota, kindergarten is optional. It's not a required grade. However, once enrolled, compulsory attendance is required. So actually some real confusion about what that means. We're hearing that from families and districts and teachers of, when it's optional, when it is no longer optional, why it's optional, what that means for the responsibility of a family, of a teacher, of a school. So definitely. And then of course, just the vibe that kindergarten is like daycare anyway. Now I will share that's in red there, that feeling we did not hear from our family and grade engagement. The families never said, we don't really care about kindergarten anyway. That did not come through. Now we only engaged with 15 families, and we have heard anecdotally that there are families out there that are just not totally bought into kindergarten. So and it did come through with our district engagement, but just wanted to clarify that this is maybe worth we need to better understand this phenomenon a little bit more, but it is something that affects kindergarten attendance. And then also this came a lot from some of our rural district engagement, was this sense of impermanence. Especially from immigrant or refugee communities, just feeling like they're passing through, and kindergarten is not their number one priority in their day-to-day life. And I can only imagine this is bubbling up even more right now in our immigration state of fear across communities, and getting your child to kindergarten when there's a lot of other concerns in an immigrant family. It'll be interesting to see if and how this affects attendance rates in schools, including with kindergarten students. So because it was already mentioned piece of the puzzle. So, all right. And then concerns about developmentally inappropriate expectations. So this was chosen by 25% of the survey respondents. But we also had other bits, that came in through the data about ambivalence towards kindergarten. other ways that it kind of bubbled up, this idea of it being developmentally inappropriate. So some parents, this quote from a teacher, are not, may not understand what kindergarten is going to be like. And we certainly know that it can and should have some academic flair to your kindergarten experience. It's not just playing outside like maybe they experienced in their daycare. It's not just dress up. There is academic work, more emphasis on that going on. And at the same time, we also know and hear that many kindergarten classrooms have perhaps become too much like a third grade classroom, less time for play and exploration, and the ways, developmentally appropriate play-based education, which can be a turnoff to families too, and we know can be very difficult for teachers and for the children. So, trying to balance that, understanding of for families, what is kindergarten, alongside how can we make these classrooms more developmentally appropriate, joyful, welcoming, because it's such a critical year. And when it becomes a less joyful or a feeling of an inappropriate expectations, that is going to deter families from supporting their child or feeling comfortable with their child there. So really a quote that really stuck out to us, and kind of there was, more context to this quote as well. And we do a lot of talk, Kate and I and our team, about how we can support more play in kindergarten classrooms. Again, developmentally appropriate instruction, all these things that we know are how young children learn best. But one thing that really stuck out to all of us was this quote from a parent, that's not even just about the materials that the children have access to or their day-to-day routine, but really just even about the disposition and of the teacher and the way their child is being spoken to. And I would even take you back to that quote of like, if my kid is stressed about going to school and having a little emotional meltdown, that concern about sending them, if the experience, like on this quote, is that you feel they are not being spoken to in a developmentally appropriate way, not being supported in a developmentally appropriate way. So when families are, having these experiences, seeing these things happen, it's not as welcoming and joyful. It doesn't feel appropriate for the age of their child, and attendance is less a priority at times, or a challenge. So another piece of data that we really liked and have been thinking about how we can replicate for a larger sample size is the contractor doing the family engagement asked these family participants to name settings that their children love to frequent, and as a family they are able to consistently attend, or it's a place they consistently get to more reliable attendance. And what were the characteristics of those places? Like, what made them make that effort? And so these were some of the key characteristics that they listed, that are places that they know their children love to be and that they make a consistent effort to get to. So being outdoors, interacting with others, having fun, being engaged, having lots of different things to do to maintain their attention, to choose their own interests. Opportunities to move and get energy out. We know young children really shouldn't be sitting for really more than like 5 minutes at a time, right? Certainly not, 90 minutes. They need to move. Special individualized attention, relationship building opportunities, opportunity to connect with family members, to be with their families, build those relationships. And then my favorite is small, cozy places. So keeping in mind, this was done in December, so very fitting, I think, for the time of year, but just that recognition that children want those, that sense of belonging, that cozy place to be, that kind of good vibes feeling. So, well, we wanted to get a lot of information about like why and what was this phenomenon of chronic absenteeism in kindergarten. We really wanted to know what is working. How is this being addressed? And some of the promising practices that were identified by districts are listed here. What I want to note is that attendance incentive programs were very common. So things like pizza parties, if everyone gets to school for a week or a month or whatever. And while we do want to recognize that important sense of community that those programs can build, that sense of pride of a group, We know there are some real problems with those practices as well. So for example, if a child is really sick, or if their family's car breaks down, they don't have transportation, the burden of putting the upheaval of that pizza party on a child or a few children is really problematic and not very equitable, or of course sensitive to different lifestyles. So while we're seeing this happening, again, knowing that sense of pride and community is important. I think it's all in our best interest to start brainstorming other ways to build those positive feelings without the shame and blame that comes with incentive programs. Personalized family outreach, home visiting being named, especially in kindergarten, which is so critical. Wanting to note that home visits doesn't always mean in these actual surveys too, they were not always in the homes of families as much as meeting at parks or other comfortable places. Transportation assistance, and district or school-based attendance teams. These are some quotes. We just love quotes because it's so nice to hear from the field. We make the calls and send notes home, but it's overwhelming from teachers when we don't have enough support from administration to follow through. You know, they can find out all these challenges, and then what can the teacher do? We know it matters, but it's tough without much support. So really a call for support from admin and recognition of the value of making those family connections and that outreach. Home visits. One teacher who says home visits is something I'm really proud of. I could tell endless stories of how I've seen it make a visible, tangible difference. Takes a lot of time and energy, but I'm lucky my school has the resources to pay us for that extra effort. So that is a huge privilege to have those resources, but perhaps something we could all consider how to support teachers in doing, because we know it's very effective. It's one of the known effective strategies for young children for kindergarten attendance are those home visits. And it covers a lot of other things too, like the importance of relationship building and teacher-family connections. So these were some of the top needs to do these attendance supports from districts: additional staffing, targeted training on how to, support families that are experiencing trauma and children, cultural competency. Flexible funding came up a lot, and better data sharing, which we know these are conversations we're having at the state level as well. Some emerging strategies. So these were things that maybe were not happening as widely as some of the other earlier pointed out strategies, but were kind of promising practices. So having family attendance advocates. So other families connecting with new incoming families to kind of identify challenges and help, address obstacles and understand the kindergarten experience. Increased use of tech for communication. So both things like text, audio messages that were in home languages as well, and easy reporting systems. I know my own experience figuring out that I needed to report my child's attendance was the first hurdle that I had to get over. And then the systems can be really clunky. I have kids in 2 different schools, and they're different, and they need different timing, and they want different ways of reporting that. So trying to be more streamlined there. Kindergarten transition planning. So starting early with building those relationships, not just, the week before school starts or the day of. And then co-locating services. We know full service community schools tend to have higher attendance rates because there's a lot of those services that families might need right there in the school or next to the school nearby. One finding that was really cool, this was through the family engagement. So again, 15 families, caregivers were engaged. I think they did 3 focus group sessions. And while the contractor referred to them, they were titled, I believe, as focus groups. Like there was no change to that. It was to hear about, experience with attendance. The participants independently began referring to those sessions as support groups for each other. And so it was really brought to our attention that families just being able to I don't want to say share their grievances, but, express their obstacles that they were experiencing and realizing they were not alone in some of those experiences, and learning from each other on what was done, how they overcame different challenges. I do want to highlight in that first quote, there are other parents out there that go through things and advocate for their kids. It's nice to know that there are other parents out there that protect their kids the way that I do. And of course, I think it's important that we recognize that the word protection, knowing that we really want school to be positive and not a place that families are feeling like they need to protect their child from, or the experiences they need to be protected from. So something to mull over. But then also the, hearing from other people's experiences. So if I'm going through it, I'll know what to do. So being even proactive instead of reactive to the challenges, like, as a parent, you might not have that same challenge as your fellow parent, but one day you might. And, what did they do to overcome, and what can we learn from each other? So from our consultant who worked with districts, they actually came up with quite a few more recommendations that are on this list, but I just like to highlight a few. We've got a lot to work through in our work at the state. And they divided them by immediate, things we need to be doing right away, medium term, and long term. And I starred the establishing regular cross-agency meetings because we have already done that. Yay! We are having meetings in multiple different ways with lots of different divisions in our agency as well as across agencies. And Kate and I are always there to attend and remind everyone about kindergarten and the early grades, because otherwise there's not often that voice of how important those early years are. But there certainly is an awareness and a commitment to supporting more consistent attendance in our pre-K 12 space across multiple agencies. So happy that that's getting organized. You can just see here, I'm not going to read through all of these, but other things that I think we need to work through as well as want to share with districts that are kind of identified tasks for us to consider. And I believe I will share quickly, the full report of this district engagement is not available for public use, but there is a one pager that our consultant was able to publish, and I believe that's on our reference list. So you can dig more into that if you're interested. From the family engagement, these were some of their recommendations. Effectively engaging families, that really supports that request from teachers for more trauma-informed and culturally relevant guidance, as well as I think one of their asks was just for learning better family engagement strategies. We're in an ever-changing world. The needs of families are changing, every week at this point, if not every day, and communication tools are changing and languages are growing. So wanting that ongoing professional development, which is also something that our family consultant said families would like that from their teachers too. Family-centered and asset-based systems and programs, really focusing on asset-based language, less like penalizing and shaming and blaming, more positive approaches, how can we help? Child-centered classrooms, again, flexible policies, developmentally appropriate approaches to kindergarten instruction, and to, like we said, just dispositions, engaging, speaking to and with children and their families, and recognizing and validating the history that warrants mistrust. And again, like I said, I think there's probably a next level of that right now with our challenges with immigrant families. It's not even history anymore. Now it's just current reality, and how do we build that trust, and what can we do in this climate to help families, because we really are here to help all children. Whew. Okay, so that is a quick overview. As I said, there we will be sharing our resources, but want to just open it now to hear from all of you. I think we're just always interested in learning more and figuring out connections and disconnections, and any questions you might have.
And before you leave, we do have some questions for you about your kindergarten transition process. So I saw a couple people drop off already, so I just wanted to mention that, because they're like, oh no, reflection, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
Olivia, I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind turning off the shared screen so that
Yep.
we can see everybody who's here. And
Yes.
I did put the discussion questions in the chat for folks, but
Great.
thank you, first of all, for the information and sharing it, and also pointing out some of those things as a former elementary school principal, the number of internal conversations I've had with myself around, okay, we need to incentivize school attendance, and I know which kids aren't going to be able to make it, and now they're going to be ostracized on the playground because they didn't come to school that day, or the parent phone calls around, my child is really sick. You want me to send them to you sick? You told me home if they have a fever. All those kinds of things. Like, it just feels like there's just such a dilemma around that sometimes in the relationships that you referenced, but appreciate the opportunity to learn from the things that you've learned and just open it up to the group. What are the things that you're wondering about? Tom, you have your camera on, so I'm going to pick on you.
Yeah.
Anything you're thinking about?
No, not really. I looked at just the first survey question regarding the transition. I work as a school superintendent, like a lot of teachers, administrators, so forth. I'm really proud of our community. I'm not sure, I don't believe, and I'm married to a kindergarten teacher who serves on the MKA Association state level. Right here locally, I'm comfortable with our attendance practices and our parent involvement in our school, but attendance continues to be an issue for us, our school, especially as we stretch throughout the grade levels. So, obviously, we still have parents. For us in our community, it's not so much a cultural issue, although we're seeing more and more diversity. We're in Roseville, Minnesota, Northwest Minnesota. We have had an influx of diversity, which is a good thing for our community, um, with some major manufacturers in the area. For us, ESL is not so much of an issue in terms of numbers across the spectrum, but continuing to work with our families is needed to encourage consistent and regular attendance, not just at the kindergarten level. So I'm not sure I really have anything deep to add here. I wanted to be a part of this conversation today to hear and try to see and listen to what I might hear regarding the kindergarten level that we could translate or push across the board. I was happy to see that on that map that showed responses earlier. Rosa was represented in some of that summer feedback. So thanks for your.
And Kate, are there continued conversations? Like, what are the next steps at, kind of on your side of the work that can help and inform ours?
So we are partnering a lot with our Compass leads at MDE. Again, just trying to make sure that in all of the work that they're doing out in the service cooperatives around supporting attendance, that early education perspectives are included. And I know that they have also played a role in some of the work that's been done at the legislature. There was that work group, the attendance work group that took place this summer. And I know that our two Compass leads provided testimony to that with our input. So we know there's, things happening at the state level. It'll be interesting to see how things play out as the legislative session wraps up. But yeah, I think we all recognize that this is going to be ongoing work. And for those that are here, that are still here, I do just want to give you the opportunity to provide us some information about kindergarten transition processes that you may have, because we know that having formal kindergarten transition processes can start that building that relationship with the child and family. I put the link to the survey in the chat, but you can also go to menti.com if you have a separate device like a phone. Menti.com and use the code that's on the screen, 821-4607. And so we're just curious, just trying to get an idea if your district has a formal kindergarten transition process. If you do, we would love to know what you include in that process, whether that's meetings, data sharing, having a K open house. And then we're also curious which partners are included. So are the transition processes just for early childhood special education? Does it include your general education preschool programs? Is it both? And then we're just also curious what additional information or resources we can provide to support that transition process. Because again, we know that setting children and families up for success as they transition into the formal educational system for many of them for the first time. That would be helpful for us to know as well. So just wanted to throw that opportunity for people to provide feedback out there. Well, if you have any questions, our email addresses are listed on that slide deck, and we would be happy to respond to any questions or engage in further conversation. If this is something that your district is interested in talking more about, we'd be happy to do that too.
I was writing, Kate. I can't apparently write and at the same time. So thank you so much for the information. I really appreciate including your contact information as well, so that as folks have questions, they're able to reach out to you, and just appreciate the connection. So as you continue this work, if there are things that you learn that you think, oh my goodness, our superintendents need to know about that, we would love to have you again. Particularly, I think, as Tom referenced, things that you learn that would cross grade levels and buildings. What are those things that we're finding that are working that might very easily be utilized in other grades or building levels? So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Will
Thank
there-
you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
will
you.
there be a link available, and you may have already mentioned this, a recording of this meeting that I could share? And if you already mentioned that, I'm sorry. So,
Yes, Dave will share a link to the recording with everybody who registered. Dave, do you also have, you'll include a link to the presentation as well?
Yes, if they could send it to me, I'll include it too.
Perfect. If you wouldn't mind, Olivia and Kate, just sending even a PDF version so that Dave could share it, I think that'd be really helpful. Some of those images just really tell a story too.
absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for your work, everybody.
Thank you.